And I think it's up to
Yes.
Donald Trump now to say, well, what does that deal actually mean? This is a man
Yeah.
who's prided himself on being a deal maker, wrote a book on it, ran a fake university that told
Mm.
people he could make them, amazing, masterful deal makers. It's on him to show that he can balance those two.
Today, dozens of European leaders, including Keir Starmer, are gathered in Budapest for a summit of what's called the European Political Community. That is the European Union and others, many others outside the EU, some wanting to join, others, like Britain, were just joining in. Keir Starmer is keen to talk about tackling the flow of asylum seekers across the Channel by, as he puts it, smashing the smuggling gangs, or trying to. They are all preoccupied, though, with what's happening here in the USA and what it means for security, for Ukraine, for European economies, as and when Donald Trump follows through on his promise to hit all countries selling goods into America with trade tariffs. Border charges, 10%, 20%, 60% in the case of China. It would mean global trade war, a war that economists believe no one can win and which hit consumers and economies right across the world. I'm just bringing you this, a bit of breaking news as I speak. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has just posted on X saying, good to speak to US Vice President-elect J.D. Vance as UK Deputy Prime Minister. And Angela Rayner says, we spoke about our plans for the future and how working together we build on the special relationship between our great countries. In some ways, nothing exceptional, is there, about a tweet like that from a senior minister in the new government? But just close your eyes for a moment and think about Angela Rayner in contact with J.D. Vance, one of the most right-wing of Donald Trump's team, seen as being more MAGA, more Trumpite than Donald Trump himself. Now, as and when those two meet, I really hope I'm going to be there. Meanwhile, tell me what you are thinking about all of this. Right now, though, let's catch up on that European political summit in Budapest and talk and welcome to Gabriel Gavin. Hello to you, Gabriel. Welcome.
Hello, good evening. Good to be back with you.
Right, lovely. Now, just have a listen to this. We had words from Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General. He was talking about what Donald Trump's win meant for Europe.
I think what it will mean for all of us is that you have a president who is experienced, who is extremely clear about what he wants. He will push us all to spend more on defense, and he's right on this. He was right. He got his way. We went to the 2%. Thanks to his doing for a large part, but he will also force us to do more in the future. And when you look now at North Korea getting involved in Ukraine, delivering the latest state-of-the-art, missile technology from Russia, the fact that China, Iran, North Korea and Russia are working together. This is a threat not only to the European part of NATO, but also to the United States mainland.
That's Mark Rutte there, the new Secretary General of NATO. Speaking almost warmly of Donald Trump. I've seen Mark Rutte, Gabriel, described in the past as being a Trump whisperer. Is that about right?
Well, I think there's a market for Trump whisperers now. Just about every European politician, in the UK, Nigel Farage has tried to position himself as someone who can talk to Donald Trump. The reality is that as of January, everybody's going to have to talk to Donald Trump. And one thing that we know about the Republican candidate is that he tends to like people who are nice to him, who flatter him, who appeal to his instincts, and he tends to disparage people who have reservations about his opinions on democracy, his attitude towards disputing elections that he's lost. But I think what's really interesting now is that unlike the first Trump term, where we saw just widespread despair from European leaders, people are saying now, very much at the EPC summit in Budapest and elsewhere, it's time to get going. It's time to act. So on defense in particular, we know that Trump has always been critical of those he sees as kind of not paying their fair share when it comes to defense spending for European security. And it is, most people here in Brussels, where I am, will acknowledge that it's absurd that countries like Belgium, Spain, Italy pay well below the 2% NATO defense spending target while investing, huge sums in their own ridiculous, very European style bureaucracies. They're just simply not doing their part for the security of the continent. And I think there's an awareness that if people come out and say, well, Donald Trump is a threat to the West, people will say, well, why aren't you doing more? Why are you being so dependent on America? We're 2.5 years into Russia's genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Why has Europe not stepped up?
Right. Now, what about Ukraine? Just a thought on that, Gavin, if I could. Donald Trump wants a deal in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin wants Ukraine. European leaders, though, are divided.
Well, I think everybody wants a deal in Ukraine. I think the Ukrainians want a deal in Ukraine. And I think the question is, what version of that deal is there? I mean, the Ukrainians want a version that respects their own territorial integrity, that ensures that they aren't going to be the victim of more and more Russian aggression. I think every European leader wants to see that happen. I think what Vladimir Putin wants is total capitulation, the installation of a kind of Russian-backed proxy, some kind of word about demilitarization, caps on Ukrainian forces, so that if Russia were ever to try and stage another aggression, they would have no opposition. So I think there's a deep contention here between what Russia wants and what the rest of Europe, and particularly the Ukrainians, want. And I think it's up to Donald Trump now to say, well, what does that deal actually mean? This is a man who's prided himself on being a deal maker, wrote a book on it, ran a fake university that told people he could make them, amazing, masterful deal makers. It's on him to show that he can balance those two. And I think what the Ukrainians really don't want is a bad deal that leaves them open to another round of Russian aggression in 5 or 10 years' time after the Russians have regrouped.
Clearly, there are tensions within Europe. Hungary, Viktor Orban, will be looking for something more to the liking of Putin. Other European leaders, not least Keir Starmer, they would want a very different thing. And meanwhile, the German government is collapsing, so that'll upset some of the balance. But Gavin, good to talk to you. We'll talk more about that in a short while. Now, lastly, let me get the thoughts of Sir Mark Lyall Grant, who's a former UK ambassador to the United Nations and former National Security Advisor. Welcome back to the programme, Mark.
Good evening, John.
Mark, so when we listen to Donald Trump talking about pulling away from the sort of full support for Ukraine we've seen in the past, should Ukraine be panicking?
I think that Ukraine will be very concerned, and clearly President Zelensky is concerned because of some of the rhetoric that Donald Trump has used during the last 4 years, and particularly during, obviously, the campaign. Because when he talks about ending this conflict, settling it in 24 hours, that could only be done on the basis of huge concessions by Ukraine to Russia. And what we haven't discussed a great deal is what President Putin would think of such an idea. I don't think he's going to be just satisfied with freezing the status quo. So he would probably demand more territorial concessions plus neutrality, guaranteed neutrality of Ukraine, and that isn't something that either Ukraine or Europe would welcome for obvious reasons. So yes, there's a reason to be concerned, but as we know, Donald Trump is very unpredictable, and that unpredictability can be useful with adversaries. It's obviously pretty hair-raising for America's allies, but nonetheless, I don't think it's a given that Donald Trump, as president, would just sell out Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden is still the president until January. Could he use that time to rush through an aid package while he's still in the White House? Is that possible?
I don't think there's any chance of getting a new aid package through Congress. No, that isn't realistic. However, he hasn't delivered yet on the full $65 billion package that's already been agreed by Congress. So yes, he can accelerate those arms supplies. I mean, he could even lift the restrictions that he's got on long-range missiles into Russian territory, the ATACMS and the Storm Shadow, which at the moment are blocked from targeting Russian sites. That would be possible. I'm not sure that he will want to do that. All his statements so far, including just recently in public, have been he's going to do the right thing. He's going to have ensure a peaceful transition. But he certainly has the authority as president and commander-in-chief to actually up the ante in the next couple of months.
Right. Now, when we look at the war in Ukraine, when we look at NATO and the talk from Donald Trump of just pulling back from the level of support we've got used to from America for NATO when it comes to to Western Europe and that border with Russia, well, we see Germany, for example, that government's collapsing, and there are different views on that around Europe. Is there a particular place there for British leadership?
Well, I think there's a place certainly for Anglo-French leadership. Look, the situation isn't as bad as when Donald Trump was president first time round, then only 5 NATO countries met the 2% target for spending on defense of GDP. Now it's something like 21 countries. So a lot of European countries have stepped up their defense spending, some very significantly, particularly the Baltic states, Poland, and those most threatened directly by Russia. So, you know, President Trump's already had some impact from his first time as president. No doubt he'll want to keep up the pressure, but I don't see any particular sign that he's going to, withdraw from NATO or resile from the Article 5 commitment once he becomes president. But as you say, the big question mark is over Germany at the moment. With German politics in such a mess, the chance of them substantially increasing defense spending in the near future is very remote. And that does give an opportunity for the British to work with the French. And indeed, some German politicians are asking for that to happen. The risk there, though, is that President Macron will fall back on talking about European sovereignty, European autonomy, which he's toyed with in the past, which actually wouldn't be very helpful because it could accelerate the separation of North America from the European continent.